Unfortunately, it has not been planned that well, and it's proving to be the worst election so far. Each election seems to have got one step worse. So the 2017 election was worse than 2012. 2022 has been a further deterioration from 2017.
You know, every time, and we talked about it in 2017, and everybody said they must improve the system, improve the way the election plays out, but that doesn't seem to happen. Why not?
Well, partly there's that consideration of all those issues during the election and immediately after the election, although there are the observer reports and there's some seminars and workshops held. Quickly, it's semi-forgotten about, and it's then really only in the build-up to the next election that all the preparations start sort of winding out, and many of them are too late. Now, some would also say that, well, people gain office through a process that is problematic, and they don't have a lot of incentive to reform that process. So that's another perspective, and I think there's some truth in that as well.
So self-interest likes the chaos. But in some provinces like Enga, the violence and corruption has been so bad, there's talk that the poll may be declared invalid. Has that ever happened?
Yes, in 2002, in fact, the election in the Southern Highlands, which was at the time the Southern Highlands plus Hela province, it became so violent, and that whole province was declared a failed election, and they had to hold a by-election or a subsequent election a year or so later. But yes, this year we've had problems in several provinces, and particularly certain electorates within those provinces. And unfortunately, it was not just in some of the Highlands provinces. Some of the violence and the problems escalated into some of the coastal provinces as well, like Morobe, with a couple of the electorates in the Markham Valley and over in Kabum.
So do you think there will be polls that will be declared invalid?
I don't see how else they can handle at least 4 of the constituencies. Hopefully not whole provinces. And it does appear that some of the other Highlands provinces are so far relatively peaceful. There's a lot of discontent about the lack of names on the roll, including amongst older people whose names were there before but don't appear to be there this time. But nevertheless, the rest of the Highlands seems so far to have been learning the lesson and to have avoided some of the problems. But yes, in some of those provinces, some of the constituencies, particularly Compium and up in Lygum, up in Payam, in the vicinity of the Porgera mine, and then down in the Markham Valley. Yes, they only started progressing in the whole process, and then it appears that ballot boxes were being moved around. The other candidates put in complaints, expressed joint views to the electoral office, asked for certain action, and at some point along the line, the level of tension sort of built up, and no one was on the ground in a position to actually restrain it. And unfortunately, it didn't just cause damage to the ballot papers, but in some cases other damage to public assets, and including some school buildings and so on, occurred.
Yes, and I mean, we've seen deaths, and that is not unusual as well. How do people feel? How do the people in the electorate, because we know there's a lot of vote buying during this process as well, are they frustrated, or do they just go along with however this rolls?
I think there is a high level of frustration. There's frustration that the rolls are not comprehensive. There's frustration that there's a 5-year period between elections, adequate, one would think, to actually prepare for the next one. And particularly frustration by people who've had their names on the rolls for many, many years and find that they're unable to vote. Yes, there have been abuses over successive years. There's been what they call block voting, where the whole community votes together, whether by agreement or by the decision of some of the community leaders. And then one has all kinds of scenarios. There are 3 votes in the preferential voting system here, and sometimes people find that they are only given the 3rd choice to fill in, and that the rest has already been filled in for them. There are scrutineers are not allowed to be inside the polling area, but some are generously coming in and helping people who don't actually necessarily need to be helped to fill in their ballot. So there are a lot of shenanigans, and candidates as well as voters are frustrated. Other candidates are saying, well, look, it wasn't quite like this before, but we're being asked for rewards by some of the voters. And there are also gangs of youths who sometimes have a mind of their own. They may be voting on using other people's names, voting on other people's behalves, but nevertheless, PNG is very, very committed to a free and fair election process. So people want their opportunity. I know in Australia you have to vote by law, and nevertheless around much of the world, you get low turnouts. In Papua New Guinea, everyone is pretty well wanting to vote. Unfortunately, many find they're unable to vote, or others have voted already for them, or then when they have voted, the ballot boxes may not actually get to the final polling station. So there's a lot of commitment amongst voters. Many of the election officers are trying to do the right thing, and most of the candidates are trying to do the right thing. But unfortunately, the problem is the earlier you can prepare for it, the earlier the funding is actually released to enable it all to work relatively like clockwork, then the better the level of trust and opportunity for it to go smoothly. But obviously, the more that's left to the last minute, the less people are actually able to check their names on the rolls in visible places, the more things that are added at the last minute. Like this time we added 7 new electorates literally at the last minute after ballot papers were already initially prepared.
So, and also obviously to give legitimacy to any government that comes in. Good to talk with you, Paul. We'll watch with interest as it plays out. Thank you.
Thank you.